Hello and welcome to Deep Dive Tuesday. I'm Troy Schmidt from Family Church. And last Sunday, we answered the question that we received during our Because You Asked series, are we living in the last days? And the answer to it is yes, that's the answer. And we get that from Scripture, specifically from Hebrews 1 through 2. Let me read it to you. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors by the prophets at different times and in different ways. And in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son. See, in the New Testament, the phrase last days is a technical term. That means that it always has the same meaning whenever it is used. And who better to speak about that than our resident biblical scholar, Charles Cooper.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for that. Thanks for being here. So what does that term last days mean?
Yeah, we use it more in a generic sense today. It has come to mean the time right before Jesus returns, which is primarily because most people who believe in eschatology or last things are familiar with Jesus' discourse called the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus talks about things that are going to confront people prior to his coming. Wars and rumors of wars, there's going to be famines, earthquakes in various places, and kind of national upheavals. And so whenever something happens, national upheavals or wars or famine or something like that, people start thinking that we're in the last days.
Yeah.
So
every hurricane, every earthquake,
everything,
last days.
or every television evangelist who wants to make money start getting people excited about something, and that get them to come out, and then everybody starts getting frenzied. Well, actually, last days is a generic term meaning period just before Jesus returns is a popular use of that term. But that's not what the biblical term means. The last days is a technical term, which means it means a certain thing every time it's used, and it means age. So when he says last days, he's actually talking about the age, which of course was inaugurated by his birth and will culminate with its return. So if you want to be theologically accurate, you wouldn't use last days as a designation for the days that are immediately, imminently upon Jesus' return, because that wouldn't be technically correct. I will give you the correct one for that a little later, but that's technically not the same one. So we shouldn't, what I really want to make sure you understand is that you shouldn't be running around afraid or fearful every time something happens that is abnormal or out of the unusual. It doesn't mean that Jesus is getting ready to knock on the door, or that you're not going to ever get a chance to get married, or you're never going to have a chance to buy a car or own a house. All the things that people think not going to happen because Jesus is going to turn tomorrow, that's really not what that means, and it shouldn't frighten you just because there's upheaval in nature or things going on.
So when we see that word days and last days, are there other days that we should be concerned about that are in the Bible?
Actually, we should.
Okay.
Last days is actually not one that you should be really worried about at all. Because
really
the
nothing
Bible,
you can do about it,
nothing we can do about it, and most of us probably going to be dead anyway when the last day comes. But the Bible uses the word day as kind of a technical term for time period. It refers to time periods and last days as an age, now almost 2,000 years. But the next day that God has on his calendar, so if you're looking at God's calendar, you would have days, and it would be a long period of time. And then the next stop would be Day of the Lord. And Day of the Lord is a period where Christ is going to be front and center in everybody's face and eyes in terms of what God is doing. There won't be any mistake. You'll know what it is. You'll know exactly what's going on.
It's usually a day of judgment, right?
It can be a day of judgment, but it's usually typically associated with a day of judgment. But there's more than judgment going on in the Day of the Lord. It is Jesus' day in court when he vindicates, proves to the universe that he is exactly who he said he was, and he's going to do exactly what he said he's going to do. So the Day of the Lord is really the one that you really should be worried about, because that's the one that poses the greatest amount of problems if you're not on the right side of human history.
So that's his return.
That's his return.
The Day of the Lord is his return.
The Day of the Lord.
That's the next one on the calendar. Of course, every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess. Yeah. That's very important.
Now, the last day, which Jesus referred to in John chapter 6, verse 40, he says, on the last day, all those who believe in him will be raised from the dead, that he will call the dead from the grave. Now, see, because we're so used to thinking day means 24 hours, when we read that word in the text, we typically associate a meaning that is not intended. He doesn't mean that it's a 24-hour period on the last day. What he means is in the days, his day, and the last day of the resurrection, the calling of the righteous dead from the grave. So the two most important days for you, for us, is really the day of the Lord and the last day when we are called from the grave into the life of Christ.
Wow.
That's more exciting.
Now, that term day, now that I understand that it's more of a period of time, an
Correct.
era, so to
Correct.
speak. But these 2 days that you're talking about, there's a shorter period of time. It almost feels like it's a twinkling of an eye, it's described.
We do.
So on that day, something really fast is going to happen.
It probably would be better translated from the Greek, in that day, because he's not talking about a 24-hour period. He's talking about a period of time in which God has destined certain events to occur.
Okay.
And so, the day of the Lord is, at a minimum, it's 6 months. Maybe it's going to be longer than that, but at a minimum, it's 6 months. And the resurrection, the calling of the dead, extends over a period of time, beginning, of course, with the ethereal reunion.
Right. So we've talked about days. Are there any nights that we need to be concerned about?
And that's even a better question. Because people get scared about last days and they think Jesus is going to come and they're going to get sucked up or be caught up in tribulation with Antichrist and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. The night actually is a more beautiful image that God uses, and Jesus used it particularly in Matthew. When you ask, "Are we in the last days?" Typically, there's fear behind that, of being caught up in the tribulation and all that kind of stuff like that. The night in the Jewish scriptures, night comes before day, and unhappiness, persecution, usually associated with the night, and then the day brings joy, relief, and deliverance. And as believers, we have been taught that it is the night that is the true sign that our day, our age is about to begin. And Jesus used beautiful analogy for this. Actually, in Matthew 24, Paul does it in 2 Thessalonians as well, that the night is like birth. And Jesus actually took the analogy and built around it the signals that we need to be aware of for his return. So the beginning birth pains, the first indication that it's time for the baby to come, and then hard labor, when it's time for the baby really to come, and then the deliverance, and the baby comes out of darkness and it sees light. Now, it's been living 9 months in darkness, but it comes into light, and it is then associated with life. So the night, our theological night, is going to be the period, however long it is, when we are confronted with the evil that Jesus Christ is going to vanquish. And unfortunately, some generation is going to face that onslaught.
Yeah.
But every night gives way to day. And the day will be the coming of Christ to set forth a new age, the age when we will finally get the fullest appreciation of what Jesus Christ is. In theological terms, they talk about already not yet. Some parts have already happened, and then there are others that have not. The already not yet. I would say it would be better characterized as you ain't seen nothing yet. You
Not on that day.
When Christ comes, whatever we have experienced, including the last days, is going to pale in comparison.
Yeah. And I think about that one scripture, it's in Timothy, where it says, in the last days, men will be lovers of self, they'll be arrogant and greedy, and he goes on to list all these things. And I always look at that and I go, oh yeah, but gee, It's always been like
It's always
that.
been that way.
And so we're always sort of looking for signs of the last days. And what you're saying here is, what's the use? It's here.
It's already here.
And we're already acting that way. We're already giving Jesus enough reason to come back
Exactly.
at any moment.
Exactly.
So let's just be ready.
Yeah. Actually, people read it when they read the Bible. Sometimes the Bible is giving them clues. They're just not picking up on them. For example, it says in 2 Timothy 3:1, which is what you were referring to, hard times are going to come in the last days. And it makes people think last days must be a short period, sometime way in the future. But when last days is the age, this whole age has been characterized by a steady progression towards lawlessness. Every generation gets worse than the previous one. It's always been that way. And it's always going to continue to be that way. It's just that we haven't experienced that kind of lawlessness to the degree that we're seeing it, which makes us think, God, this has to be the end. It can't get any worse than this. Well, actually, it can.
It can.
And it will. But the light is never as bright as it is in the darkest period. And our light should be at its brightest because we are in the darkness of the wickedness of this world presently.
Wow.
It's hope, ladies and gentlemen. With every day that it marches downhill to ugliness, it's a clear indication that the night is going to soon give way to our day.
Yeah. Well, great words to end on. Thank you so much, Coop, for that insight. For those of you, we hope you appreciated this deep dive as we looked into the last days. I guess it was encouraging to find out that we're not looking forward to them. We're already in them. And so now is the time for the church to rise up, to be that light that Coop just talked about, and to spread the love of Jesus everywhere we go. Thanks for joining us, and come see us next week.